In the season 3 finale of Breaking Bad, Gus enacts a plan to kill both Jesse and Walter due to the various problems he sees in working with them. Jesse is a drug addict and Walt has various ties to the DEA. Gus needed them because they were good at cooking meth, but now that Gail has perfected Walt's formula, Walt and Jesse aren't needed. This forces Jesse to kill Gail as a second-hand act of self-defense. Like many sequences of Breaking Bad, the act may be justified depending on your moral compass, but as for Jesse, this was a morally irreprehensible act that he has to now live and deal with. This deeply troubled him despite understanding the circumstances that he was in. No other event in the show, aside from maybe Jane's death, shakes the core of Jesse as foundationally as this event. In the next season, Jesse's dealing with the guilt of this with no success. In season 4, episode 7, Problem Dog, Jesse goes back to the drug rehabilitation place that he was in previously, which taught him all about self-acceptance. It all just rings so hollow. It's all just vapid and empty. He calls it all BS. When you have serious flaws that need to be corrected, you shouldn't just accept everything. In the speech, the problem dog that Jesse uses is a euphemism for Gail. Jesse talks about how this problem dog didn't deserve to die. The dog didn't do anything wrong. Given the circumstances, we know why he killed this problem dog, but as far as the group leader knows, it really was a dog that Jesse killed for no reason. It's merely a senseless act of violence. There's no defense Jesse gives for his action, and he really should feel guilty for this. He opens up and eventually does reveal that he really does feel guilty about this act. And the fact that he feels guilty is actually a really good sign. It is, in fact, good to feel guilty. It is good to reflect and not merely accept everything. Guilt isn't just looking upon what you did and accepting it, but it's looking upon yourself and calling yourself to be better. Guilt is your best self telling your current self that you can do better, that you deserve better. This makes guilt, in a way, the highest form of self-love. It's actually a lack of guilt that is a sign of a soul that's on the precipice of hell. Before we go any further, I need to explain the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is feeling bad about something that you've done, whereas shame is feeling bad about who you intrinsically are. Guilt can turn into shame, but that's not what we're talking about. We are strictly talking about guilt. In society, we tend to think that guilt is a bad thing. It means that we aren't accepting ourselves or that we don't love ourselves for who we are. We also believe that we must try and be happy at all times and minimize suffering at all cost. In a vacuum, this isn't actually bad, but you can see how this may lead to people thinking that guilt is a bad thing. It's played a large part in our societal idea that happiness is to be derived from personal fulfillment, so then anything that hinders our immediate personal fulfillment, whatever we think that means for us, is to be squashed. It reminds me of the term psychological man coined by Philip Reeve. The psychological man is morally detached from communal order. His relation to society is tepid, ambivalent, remote, and unstable. In earlier ages, personal meaning was primarily something discovered by individuals through being educated in how to situate themselves within established external structures such as the family, the church, or the nation. With the psychological turn, this isn't necessarily the case. These things can often limit what we want to do. And because we all want to do different things and we all have to live in a civilized society or whatever, we all just gotta kinda have to accept that a lot of people are different. This is all nice, but it seems to remove our ties and obligations to the larger social network. If you were to ask someone pre-say 1950s or so, they would say that it's the family, religion, their neighbors, and the country, their nations, and their obligations to all of those that give them fulfillment. These are all outwardly directed and have specific duties and require specific virtues. Self-acceptance is extremely vague, purposely broad, and requires no action on your end. If taken by itself, it's actually antithetical to action. This sociological development inevitably leads to things like my truth, don't judge, and for this video, self-acceptance. I should say now that no man is 100% a psychological man, but the psychological shift is certainly palpable. It's become more clear to me as I've grown up that the people of the past did have a point. We are not, nor are we meant to pretend to be complete by ourselves, and it's a good thing to think of ourselves within a society. And that's why we need things like self-improvement. More on that one soon. Guilt shifts the focus away from ourselves and how we feel, and directs it towards society and how we've made society at large feel.
Who among you is here hoping they can actively improve who they are? All right. See, that's your first mistake. You should be here to learn self-acceptance.
In earlier seasons, the group leader says that he isn't interested in the business of improving people. He just wants people to accept themselves. But why should Jesse do this? He's a murderer. He's guilty and should feel bad for what he did. Yet, under the group leader's self-acceptance rhetoric, he has no basis for feeling this way. He has no language to even convey the gravity of this deplorable act. If Jesse is merely accepting himself despite doing a clearly evil act, then the group leader has no basis to actually condemn it. I know that this is a more extreme case of self-acceptance, especially in the face of a completely morally vacuous evil act, but it is emblematic of something larger. The group leader's extreme self-acceptance rhetoric is an extreme example of subjective morality. It's saying that you cannot judge anything anyone does because what you may believe to be the right way to live might not be someone else's. While that may be true for some things like where you choose to live or where you choose to go on vacation, it isn't true for all facets of how we choose to live. Some things are bad and they shouldn't be done by anyone, and they should be condemned. Moreover, we are flawed people and we shouldn't accept every facet of ourselves. We may not be killers like Jesse, but we all have flaws and it does no one any good to merely accept them. We must work to improve it. We must work to become better than who we are. We shouldn't be using the group leader's form of self-acceptance, but rather we should be focusing on self-improvement. Self-improvement is an actual process that requires effort and has definable measures. It's also competitive and more of an outward expression. It practices virtue, which requires sacrifice and motion of the will. Despite what I've said, I'm not actually against the idea of accepting yourself if it is done properly. If by self-acceptance you merely mean understanding your limits, strengths, and weaknesses, then yes, I believe self-acceptance is a good thing, especially when it comes to those who struggle with their body image. I'm quite familiar with the fitness industry and I can claim to work there to some capacity thanks to my channel Apolly Athletics. I know a lot about this. With that being said, self-acceptance and self-improvement can actually work in dialectical association. This is to say that we can accept ourselves for who we are and what our limits are, while still trying to improve ourselves. How the leader used self-acceptance is more so to unconditionally embrace every part of ourselves. And this leads him to rationalize every bad behavior one may make as them just accepting themselves.
You either run from things, or you face them, Mr. White.
What exactly does that mean?
I learned it in rehab. It's all about accepting who you really are. I accept who I am.
And who are you?
I'm the bad guy.
Self-acceptance is only good for things that you can't change. It isn't exactly that self-acceptance and moving on is wrong, it was just hollow. It doesn't dig deep enough to the central issue. This is why we need guilt. Jesse says in season 3 that he's a bad person. If that's true, if he accepts that, then what a terrible life he has ahead of him. This will lead him to relentless shame. And if that is true, then Jesse doesn't want to accept that. There should be some kind of consequence to his actions.
The thing is, if you just do stuff and nothing happens, what's it all mean? What's the point?
Within the monologue, Jesse states that there's no point in life if we can do anything we want and face no judgment. We judge whether something is good or bad, worth it or not worth it, based on the consequences it tends to have, whether it leads to positive outcomes or negative outcomes. If there are no possible negative outcomes, then it really doesn't mean anything. And if nothing means anything, then why bother changing anything we do? Why not just unabashedly follow whatever our heart or mind feels at the time? This is why self-acceptance isn't good enough for those who are morally aware enough to face true guilt. For these people, there has to be repentance and accountability.
I mean, you back your truck over your own kid and you, accept? What a load of crap.
Hey, Jesse, I know you're in pain.
No, you know what? Why I'm here in the first place is to sell you meth. I made you my bitch. You okay with that? Huh? You accept?
The group leader cannot acknowledge the gravitas of what Jesse just did. Actions like that ought not be swiftly absolved. And this is why Jesse rightfully wants the group to be mad at him for committing senseless murder and for selling them meth, not to passively see him as a victim of addiction. He must feel pain and anguish for what he did, not just accept it and move on. And that's what his speech is all about, not cheaply absolving guilt. Absolving his guilt would make him a guiltless killer like Walt, like Todd. Walt may be the most self-accepting man in the series according to the group leader. There are many debates on where Walter White ended and where Heisenberg began, but it's clear that Heisenberg always existed in some nascent embryonic form from the beginning of the series. This is who he is.
You're goddamn right.
Walter was merely acting in accordance to his latent self, accepting himself for what he was and running with it. Jesse, on the other hand, rejected the self-acceptance dogma and chose virtue. Another problem with the self-acceptance dogma that I've been alluding to is that it assumes that our actions can be contained within ourselves and have no impact on the people around us. We often hear that we should just do whatever we want as long as it doesn't directly hurt people. This is true for morally innocuous things like your favorite ice cream flavor, but Breaking Bad constantly shows that this doesn't work in practice for lifestyle decisions. Meth doesn't just directly compromise the people who take it, but it hurts the people around them. It hurts the innocent children who have to deal with drug-addicted parents. Methamphetamine is a drug that harmfully impacts the users, hence why it's illegal. It's deemed so harmful that it's detrimental to society at large. When enough individuals are compromised to a sufficient degree, it harms society. The realization that meth hurts innocent children either directly or indirectly is what makes Jesse want to move out of the meth business. If things continue, it's not just consenting adults who are affected, but children like Brock who may be affected by Andrea's drug use, the random child that Todd killed, the child of the parents who stole from Skinny Pete. The meth business is heartless and dehumanizing and constantly brings in people who have no business being in it. Everyone involved in the business ends up ruining their life while taking everyone close to them down with them. With Walt, it's perhaps most evident. Walt thinks that he can compartmentalize himself by living as both Heisenberg and Walter White, but his actions as Heisenberg constantly impact his life as Walter White.
So I should stop judging and accept.
To start.
So no matter what I do, hooray for me because I'm a great guy. It's all good. No matter how many dogs I kill, I just do an inventory and accept.
Marilyn Monroe famously said, "If you don't accept me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best." This reads as something fairly harmless until you read the full quote. It says, "I'm selfish, impatient, and a little insecure. I make mistakes. I'm out of control and at times hard to handle. But if you can't handle me at my worst, then you sure as hell don't deserve me at my best." Should our selfishness, impatience, and weakness preclude us from being loved? No. Should we wallow in our flaws so much that it goes beyond guilt and becomes shame? No. But should they be accepted? Should they be given admittance or approval to, as is stated in the dictionary? No, absolutely not. We should be called to be the best that we can be, not to merely accept our flaws for what they are and do nothing to change it. Jesse feeling pain and guilt for his actions is a good thing. It shows that he's self-aware, unlike Walt, and that he's actively looking to improve. Jesse starts off the series brash, egotistical, and juvenile. His experiences eventually lead him to try, and repeatedly fail, to be virtuous. And that's what makes his ending scene in Breaking Bad, where he laughs and cries out in joy, so great. Jesse acknowledges the fact that he's done terrible things, and because of his wildly powerful conscience, he realizes this, keeps a pure heart, and is given freedom. Interestingly, either on purpose or not, this falls in line with Aristotelian and Thomistic freedom. According to them, freedom is the acquisition of virtue. Jesse could have run away with 5 million, but he didn't want it. It was tainted, it was blood money. He decided it's better given away to people who need it. In Breaking Bad, in general, to be virtuous is to sacrifice success. Life is a world where the fittest survive. You do what you need to do to get ahead. With this in mind, virtue doesn't make any sense. Therefore, the consequence of virtue in this world is suffering. And Jesse is constantly in pain for doing the right thing. Crazy 8 told Walt that he was not meant for this line of work. At this point, I was led to believe that Jesse was in line for this line of work and Walt wasn't. But as we learned throughout the show, the reverse couldn't be more true. Walt, the utilitarian, seems to be more bred for this kind of work, whereas Jesse seems to be one who's the more moral family man type. The characters go through inverted character arcs. Because of Jesse's guilt, he's able to become a better person. From a rambunctious teenager wasting his potential to the moral pillar of the group. After killing Gail, he wants out of the meth business but ends up being dragged back into it one way or another. Eventually, he's enslaved by the white supremacists into making meth. Walt had constantly been manipulating him throughout the show, and after saving him, Walt gives Jesse the opportunity to shoot him to death. After gesturing at Jesse to do it, he chooses not to. This was the first time Jesse made a decision that was his own and not influenced by Walt. He is the one who chooses Walt's fate. He is the one who chooses whether he lives or dies. It was an act of his own will. And then moreover, at the end of El Camino, he finally achieves his own freedom. He's finally able to create and live his own life. A brand new start. A brand new identity. Jesse can now be free of his guilt. The healthy way to overcome guilt is to acknowledge and practice sound moral behavior that springs from a sound moral conscience. And that's exactly what Jesse did.
I had built this thing. You should have seen it. It was insane. I built it out of Peruvian walnut with inlaid cedar wood. It was fitted with pegs, no screws. I sanded it for days until it was smooth as glass. Then I rubbed all the wood with tung oil so it was rich and dark. It was perfect.
What happened to the box?
I traded it for an ounce of weed.
There's a little bit of Jesse in all of us. We've all been that kid who constantly wards off responsibility and takes the easy way out. Jesse isn't some saint. While he does try and get rid of his drug money in season 5 as he realizes how tainted it is, the only reason he got deep into this business is because he didn't apply himself in woodworking or in school. He even does the unthinkably evil thing by trying to sell drugs to recovering addicts. It's then cathartic to see this kid learn to grow into his own person and develop virtue, despite how much suffering it causes him. Maybe Jesse getting rid of the blood money was an act of repentance, or perhaps it was helping out Andrea, or perhaps it was being tortured. Perhaps it was all of them collectively that make us feel as though he deserves this freedom. I believe that it was because of Jesse's good intentions and genuinely kind heart that made him worthy of redemption. And that is what we could assume he'll be doing after the events of El Camino. With his new life, all of his sins are washed away and he's given a blank slate. He's learned and improved himself and is now given a chance to redeem himself. He's given a chance to reform his life and live differently. Perhaps he'll go to college. Maybe he'll start a carpentry business. Maybe he becomes a teacher and works with kids. In whatever it is, he'll use what he learned in his previous life, learning from all the guilt he felt from all his previous actions, to now live a better life. I want to give a big shout out to Carter Ride for making the soundtrack for this video. Links in the description. With that being said, thank you for watching.